A woman dressed as a cook was humiliated in the restaurant she inherited from her father. But 4 hours later, everyone was shocked. In the heart of San Francisco, a city known for its diverse culinary scene and iconic landmarks, stood the majestic restaurant Angelic Flavors. Founded by chef Thomas Whitman over 4 decades ago, this establishment had become the epicenter of innovative American cuisine, attracting diners from around the world with its groundbreaking culinary creations and impeccable service. Emily Whitman, Chef Thomas's only daughter, grew up surrounded by the aromas of spices and the bustle of the kitchen. From a young age, her father had instilled in her a love for gastronomy and respect for America's culinary traditions. However, Emily had chosen a different path, studying business administration at Stanford University and subsequently completing an MBA at Harvard. The news of Chef Thomas's sudden death came as a devastating blow to Emily. At 28, she found herself forced to return to San Francisco to bid farewell to her father and face the uncertain future of the family legacy. On the day of the funeral, Angelic Flavors closed its doors for the first time in its history, and the aroma of food was replaced by that of flowers adorning the place in honor of the great chef. 3 days after the burial, Emily met with the family lawyer, Mr. Richard Hawkins, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses and an impeccable suit. In his office, located in an old building in the financial district, Mr. Hawkins pulled out a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. "Miss Whitman, your father left very specific instructions about the reading of his will," the lawyer began solemnly. "Before proceeding, I must ask you, are you prepared to take on the responsibility of running Angelic Flavors?" Emily, her eyes still red from crying, nodded with determination. "It's my father's legacy, Mr. Hawkins. I'll do whatever it takes to honor his memory and keep his dream alive." The lawyer nodded and proceeded to open the envelope. As he read the contents, his expression changed from serious to surprised. "Well, Miss Whitman, it seems your father had one last lesson to teach you." Emily leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Chef Thomas has established a condition for you to take control of the restaurant," explained Mr. Hawkins. "According to the will, you must work for a month at Angelic Flavors as a culinary apprentice, using a false name and without revealing your true identity to anyone in the establishment." The young heiress was left speechless. "A month? As an apprentice? But why?" The lawyer continued reading. Chef Thomas wrote here, "My dear Emily, I know you've chosen a different path from mine, but to truly lead Angelic Flavors, you must know its heart. This month will teach you more about the business than any book or class you've taken. I trust you'll understand the value of this experience." Emily leaned back in her chair, processing the information. On one hand, she felt frustration at this unexpected obstacle. On the other, part of her was excited by the challenge and the opportunity to connect with her father's passion. "And who will run the restaurant in the meantime?" she finally asked. "The will names Eric Roberts, the current executive chef, as interim director during this period," Mr. Hawkins replied. "He won't be aware of your presence or this condition of the will." Emily nodded slowly, remembering Chef Roberts, a man her father had trusted who had worked at the restaurant for over 15 years. "When should I start?" "The will suggests you begin as soon as possible. How about next Monday?" The young woman took a deep breath and stood up, extending her hand to the lawyer. "Very well, Mr. Hawkins. On Monday, I'll begin my month as an apprentice in my father's restaurant." As she left the office, Emily felt a mix of emotions: anxiety about the challenge ahead, curiosity to rediscover the world she had left behind, and above all, an unshakable determination to honor her father's last wish. What Emily didn't know was that this month would not only teach her about cooking and the family business, but would also confront her with secrets, intrigues, and a twist of fate that would change her life forever. On Monday morning, Emily found herself standing in front of the mirror in her old bedroom in the family home, barely recognizing herself. She had dyed her hair dark brown, replacing her characteristic blonde, and wore hazel contact lenses instead of her usual blue eyes. She was dressed in a simple cook's uniform and had removed all traces of makeup. "Goodbye, Emily Whitman." "Hello, Olivia Foster," she murmured to herself, rehearsing the fake name she had chosen for her new identity. With her heart pounding, Emily, now Olivia, presented herself at the back door of Angelic Flavors. She was greeted by Mrs. Patterson, the head of personnel, a robust woman in her 60s with a stern but kind look. "Hey, you must be the new apprentice," said Mrs. Patterson, examining her from head to toe. Full of sadness, Emily thought, as she saw the melancholic expression in the woman's eyes, a reflection of the pain from the loss of Chef Thomas that seemed to permeate every corner of the restaurant. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Olivia Foster," Emily responded, with a slightly higher-pitched voice than normal. "Well, Olivia, we work hard here and expect the best from everyone. Follow me, I'll show you the kitchen." Emily followed Mrs. Patterson through the restaurant's corridors, absorbing every detail with new eyes. The aroma of spices and the sound of knives against cutting boards filled the air. The kitchen was buzzing with activity, with chefs and helpers moving in a synchronized dance. "Attention, everyone," announced Mrs. Patterson. "This is Olivia, our new apprentice. Treat her well and teach her what she needs to know." Emily's eyes scanned the kitchen, stopping at each face. Some gave her kind smiles, others barely noticed her, immersed in their tasks. At the center of it all, giving orders in a firm voice, was Chef Eric Roberts. Emily felt a twinge of unease as she watched Chef Roberts. Something in his attitude, in the way other employees reacted to his presence, seemed different from what she remembered. Or maybe it was just her imagination, fueled by the strange situation she found herself in. "Olivia, you'll start with the basics," said Mrs. Patterson, interrupting her thoughts. "You'll help Jake at the prep station." Jake turned out to be a young man in his early 20s with an easy smile and sparkling eyes. "Welcome to hell, Olivia," he joked as he handed her a knife. "I hope you like onions because we have a million to chop." The first few hours passed in a blur of activity. Emily, used to dealing with spreadsheets and presentations, soon found herself with sore hands and teary eyes from the onions. However, she refused to complain or show weakness. During a brief break, Emily observed the kitchen dynamics with a critical eye. She noticed subtle tensions, concerned glances exchanged between employees when Chef Roberts wasn't looking. At one point, she saw a young kitchen assistant, Sophie, being harshly scolded by the chef for a minor mistake. "Is it always like this?" she asked Jake quietly, nodding towards where Sophie was discreetly wiping away a tear. Jake looked around cautiously before responding. "Things have changed since Chef Thomas, well, you know. Chef Roberts was always demanding, but lately, let's just say it's better to stay out of his way." Emily nodded, storing this information in her mind. As the day progressed, she witnessed more similar incidents, excessive reprimands, derogatory comments, a general atmosphere of tension that seemed to be stifling the passion and creativity that had always been the hallmark of Angelic Flavors. At the end of her shift, exhausted but determined, Emily headed to the locker rooms to change. As she was taking off her uniform, she overheard a hushed conversation between two waitresses. "Have you heard the rumors?" one was saying. "They say Chef Roberts is diverting money from the research and development budget." "Shh, be quiet," replied the other. "If they hear you talking about that, you could lose your job." Emily held her breath, processing this new information. Embezzlement. Was it possible that the man her father had trusted for so many years was betraying that legacy? That night, back in the safety of her room, Emily wrote down everything she had observed and heard in a notebook. Her mind was spinning with questions and theories. What else was happening beneath the surface at her father's restaurant? And how could she, in her role as a simple apprentice, uncover the truth and protect Chef Thomas's legacy? As she prepared for bed, Emily made a decision. It wouldn't be enough to simply observe during this month. She needed a plan, a way to investigate more deeply and, if necessary, gather evidence. But to do that, she would need allies. With that resolution in mind, Emily fell asleep, dreaming of kitchens, secrets, and her father's face, which seemed to watch her with a mixture of pride and concern. As the days passed, Emily, in her role as Olivia, began to gain the trust of her co-workers. Her dedication and quick learning didn't go unnoticed, and soon she found herself ascending from simple prep tasks to more complex responsibilities in the kitchen. One afternoon, while preparing a red wine reduction sauce under the supervision of the sous chef, Alex, Emily noticed that some key ingredients were missing that, according to the records, Should be in the pantry. Alex, she asked cautiously, is it normal for us to run out of these ingredients so quickly? The sous chef looked around before answering in a low voice. It didn't used to be like this, Olivia. Since Chef Thomas passed away, the orders never seem to be enough. Chef Roberts says we're optimizing costs, but their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Chef Roberts. What are you two whispering about? Get back to work. Emily noticed how Alex visibly tensed at the executive chef's presence. This reaction, added to the observations of previous days, solidified her determination to get to the bottom of the matter. That night, after her shift, Emily approached Jake and Sophie, who were sitting in the small staff break area. Guys, she began, making sure no one else could hear them. Have you noticed anything strange lately in the restaurant? Jake and Sophie exchanged concerned looks. It was Sophie who finally spoke. Olivia, we've all noticed it. The quality of the ingredients has gone down, the schedules are increasingly demanding, and the atmosphere, well, it's not the same since Chef Thomas is gone. Jake nodded. My cousin works in accounting. He says there are discrepancies in the books, but he's afraid to speak up. Emily felt her heart racing. Here was the confirmation she needed. What if we could do something about it? She suggested quietly. Sophie's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and fear. What do you mean? I think we should investigate, Emily proposed. Gather evidence, document what's happening. If we work together, maybe we can find out what's really going on and do something about it. Jake and Sophie looked at each other, a mix of excitement and nervousness on their faces. It's risky, Jake said. If we get caught, I know, Emily interrupted, but don't you think Chef Thomas would have wanted us to fight for his legacy? Her words seemed to strike a chord with both of them. After a moment of silence, Sophie nodded with determination. I'm in. Chef Thomas gave me a chance when no one else would. I owe him this. Jake sighed deeply before adding, count me in too. But we'll have to be very careful. And so Emily's secret team was born. In the days that followed, the three began to discreetly gather information. Jake used his connections in accounting to obtain copies of invoices and financial records. Sophie, with her friendly personality, managed to get other employees to share their experiences and observations. Emily, for her part, used her business knowledge to analyze the data and look for suspicious patterns. One night, as they were reviewing their findings in the small apartment Emily had rented to maintain her cover, they made an alarming discovery. Look at this, Emily said, pointing to a series of transactions in the financial records. Large sums of money are being transferred to an offshore account, and they coincide exactly with the dates when we're supposed to be making large orders for premium ingredients. But those ingredients never reach the kitchen, Sophie added, connecting the dots. Jake whistled softly. This is big, guys. We're talking about large-scale embezzlement. Emily felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Her father's legacy was being looted right before her eyes. We need more evidence, she said with determination, something they can't deny when we present it. Present it? To whom? Sophie asked curiously. Emily hesitated for a moment. She was about to reveal more than she should, but she felt she could trust Jake and Sophie. To the board of directors, she finally replied. When we have irrefutable evidence, we'll present it directly to the board. Her companions looked at her in surprise. How are we going to do that? Jake questioned. We're just kitchen staff. Emily took a deep breath. It was time to fully trust them. There's something you need to know about me, she began. But before she could continue, a loud knock on the door startled them all. Police! Open up! The three looked at each other in panic. Had they been discovered? Had someone betrayed them? With her heart pounding furiously, Emily approached the door, preparing to face whatever was on the other side. The sound of knocking on the door echoed through the small apartment, causing Emily, Jake, and Sophie to freeze in place. With trembling hands, Emily finally opened the door, only to find herself face to face with Chef Eric Roberts and two burly men who were clearly not police officers. Well, well, said Roberts with a malicious smile. Looks like we have a nest of rats snooping where they shouldn't. Emily felt her heart sink. Her cover had been blown, and now not only she, but also Jake and Sophie were in danger. Chef Roberts, Emily began, trying to keep calm, this isn't what it looks like. Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like, Miss Whitman, Roberts replied, emphasizing her real last name. Or should I say, Olivia? Jake and Sophie gasped, looking at Emily with a mixture of confusion and betrayal in their eyes. "Whitman, are you Chef Thomas's daughter?" Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, knowing there was no turning back now. "Yes, I am," she admitted, "and now I know why my father wanted me to work here incognito." Roberts let out a cold laugh. "Your father was always too clever for his own good, but this time his little plan has failed." "Why, Chef Roberts?" Emily asked, anger growing inside her. "My father trusted you. This restaurant was his life." "And he owed it to me," Roberts shouted, his facade of calm breaking for a moment. "I worked for years, innovating, creating, and he always took all the credit. When he died, I saw my chance to take what I deserved." As Roberts spoke, Emily noticed that Jake was discreetly taking out his phone, apparently sending a message. She hoped he was calling for help. "Now," Roberts continued, regaining his composure, "you three will come with me. We have a lot to discuss about your future at Angelic Flavors, if you have any." Just as Roberts' men were approaching to grab them, there was a commotion in the hallway. Suddenly the door burst open, and several police officers entered, followed by Mr. Hawkins. "Eric Roberts, you're under arrest for embezzlement and extortion," announced one of the officers. The scene that followed was chaotic. Roberts tried to escape but was quickly subdued. His accomplices were handcuffed and taken out of the apartment. In the midst of the chaos, Emily turned to Jake and Sophie, who were looking at her with a mixture of amazement and confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I wanted to tell you, but—" Jake raised a hand to stop her. "I understand why you did it," he said, "and I'm grateful that you trusted us enough to include us in your investigation." Sophie nodded, though she still seemed to be processing all the information. "You've given us the opportunity to save Chef Thomas's legacy. That's what matters." Mr. Hawkins approached them. "Miss Whitman, your father would be proud. You've demonstrated not only your ability to run the business, but also your commitment to the values he stood for." Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had completed the mission her father had entrusted her with, and in the process, she had found true allies and discovered her own passion for the family business. "What happens now?" Sophie asked. Emily looked at her friends and then at Mr. Hawkins. "Now," she said with determination, "we're going to rebuild Angelic Flavors and make it bigger and better than ever." As they left the apartment, Emily felt a mix of emotions: relief at having unmasked Roberts, gratitude towards Jake and Sophie for their loyalty, and a growing excitement for the future ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face the challenge, honoring her father's legacy and forging her own path in the culinary world. The days following Eric Roberts' arrest were a whirlwind of activity. Emily, now officially in charge of Angelic Flavors, found herself navigating a sea of legal, financial, and operational responsibilities. However, she wasn't alone on this journey. Jake and Sophie, far from feeling betrayed by Emily's initial deception, became her most fervent supporters and collaborators. Together, they formed the core of a new leadership team, each bringing their unique strengths to the restaurant's revitalization project. One sunny morning, Emily convened all the staff for a general meeting. Standing in front of the kitchen where she had worked in secret for a month, she addressed her employees with a mixture of humility and determination. "Many of you knew me as Olivia, the apprentice," she began. "Today I'm here as Emily Whitman, Chef Thomas's daughter, and the new director of Angelic Flavors. But more importantly, I'm here as someone who has worked side by side with you and has seen firsthand the passion and talent that make this place special." A murmur ran through the audience, but Emily continued confidently. "I know we've been through difficult times. Robert's betrayal has affected us all. But today, I ask you to look to the future. Together, we're going to rebuild not just the restaurant, but the family my father always wanted us to be." As Emily outlined her plans for the future, she saw how the faces around her went from uncertainty to hope, and finally, to enthusiasm. "First," she announced, "we're going to create an employee council. I want your voices to be heard in every important decision we make." This statement was met with enthusiastic applause. "Second, we're going to restore and increase the research and development budget. Innovation has always been the heart of Angelic Flavors, and I want each of you to have the opportunity to contribute your ideas." Emily saw how the eyes of the younger chefs lit up at this prospect. Third, we'll improve working conditions and benefits for everyone. A happy and healthy team is the foundation of a successful business. The applause turned into cheers at this point. And finally, Emily concluded, we're going to honor my father's legacy, not only by maintaining the standards of excellence he established, but also by extending our impact beyond these walls. I have plans for community projects that will allow us to share our passion for food with those who need it most. When she finished her speech, the atmosphere in the kitchen was electric. Emily saw tears in the eyes of some of the older employees and hopeful smiles on the faces of the younger ones. In the months that followed, Angelic Flavors underwent a remarkable transformation. The Employee Council, led by Jake, became an invaluable source of ideas and feedback. Sophie, with her culinary talent now free to flourish, headed the Research and Development Department, creating dishes that combined American tradition with innovative techniques. Emily, for her part, immersed herself in all aspects of the business. She spent her days alternating between meetings with suppliers, tasting sessions in the kitchen, and strategic planning with her team. At night, she often stayed late, reviewing numbers and dreaming about the future. It was during one of these late nights when Emily had an epiphany. Looking at an old photo of her father in the office, she remembered how he always talked about using food as a way to connect people. With that idea in mind, she began to sketch plans for an ambitious project, a series of charity dinners that would not only raise funds for local causes, but also bring together people from different social strata around the table. The first event, held 6 months after Emily took control, was a resounding success. The kitchen of Angelic Flavors served a 5-course dinner that fused traditional American dishes with haute cuisine presentations. The diners, an eclectic mix of local entrepreneurs, artists, social workers, and beneficiaries of charitable organizations, shared not only the food, but also stories and laughter. At the end of the night, as Emily observed the room full of animated conversations and new connections forming, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had found a way to honor her father's legacy while forging her own path. "Your father would be very proud," said a voice behind her. Emily turned to see Mrs. Patterson with tears in her eyes but a radiant smile on her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Emily replied, feeling her own emotion grow. "We still have a lot of work to do, but I believe we're on the right track." As the night came to an end and the last guests left, Emily stayed for a moment in the empty kitchen. The aroma of the night's dishes still lingered in the air, mixing with childhood memories and promises of the future. With a smile, she turned off the lights and headed home, ready to face the challenges and triumphs that tomorrow would bring. 5 years had passed since that night when Emily had taken control of Angelic Flavors. The restaurant had not only regained its former glory, but had become an internationally recognized culinary phenomenon. Under Emily's leadership, the business had flourished in ways that not even Chef Thomas could have imagined. On a sunny spring morning, Emily found herself on the restaurant's terrace, observing the bustle of San Francisco waking up. In her hands, she held a cup of coffee and the latest edition of World Flavors magazine, which featured Angelic Flavors on its cover. "Enjoying the view, boss?" asked a familiar voice. Emily turned to see Jake, now the restaurant's general manager, approaching with a smile. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," as Emily replied, returning the smile. "Remember when we used to hide in my little apartment, planning how to save the restaurant?" Jake laughed. "How could I forget? We went from conspirators to leaders of a culinary revolution." And it was true. In recent years, Angelic Flavors had become much more than just a restaurant. It was a center for culinary innovation, a model of ethical business practices, and a pillar of the community. The Employee Council, an idea that had emerged in those first tumultuous days, was now studied by business schools as an example of successful participatory management. Sophie, who had started as a shy kitchen assistant, now led a research and development team that constantly pushed the boundaries of American gastronomy. But perhaps the achievement Emily was most proud of was the free meal program for needy communities. What had begun as a series of charity dinners had become a large-scale initiative that provided nutritious and delicious meals to thousands of people each week. "Emily," Jake called, interrupting her thoughts. "It's time for the meeting with the tech team. They're ready to present the prototype of the new inventory management system. Emily nodded, excited. This new system, which used artificial intelligence to optimize ingredient use and reduce waste, was just the latest in a series of technological innovations that had kept angelic flavors at the forefront of the industry. As they walked to the conference room, they passed through the kitchen. Emily paused for a moment to observe the organized ballet of chefs and helpers preparing for the lunch service. The aroma of spices and the sounds of knives chopping and pots bubbling filled the air, bringing back memories of her month as Olivia. "It never ceases to amaze me," Emily murmured. "What's that?" Jake asked. "How something so chaotic can produce so much beauty," she replied, nodding towards the kitchen. Jake smiled. "Just like our story, don't you think?" Emily laughed and nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. Their journey had been full of challenges, unexpected turns, and moments of doubt, but the end result had been more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. The meeting with the tech team was a success. The new system promised not only to improve the restaurant's efficiency, but also to provide valuable data that could be used for future innovations. As Emily listened to the presentation, her mind was already racing with possibilities. Could they use this technology to help other restaurants reduce their food waste? Could they expand their free meal program using the resources saved? After the meeting, Emily headed to her office for a scheduled video call. As she entered, her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, her holding a newborn baby with a radiant smile on her face. It was an image from just a year ago when she had adopted her son, Michael. The decision to become a single mother had been another unexpected turn in her life, but one that had brought her immense joy. Balancing her role as CEO of a growing culinary empire with motherhood had been a challenge, but one she had embraced with enthusiasm. As she waited for the call to connect, Emily reflected on how her personal and professional lives had intertwined in ways she never could have imagined. The restaurant had become a second family for Michael, with the staff cooing over him and caring for him as if he were their own. The screen came to life, showing the smiling face of a middle-aged man. "Emily, great to see you." "Likewise, Anthony," Emily responded. Anthony was the director of an NGO dedicated to combating food insecurity in the United States. "How's everything going with the expansion project?" For the next hour, Emily and Anthony discussed plans to bring angelic flavors, free meal model to other cities across the country. It was an ambitious project, but Emily was convinced it was the next logical step in her mission to use food as a force for good. When the call ended, Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling a mix of excitement and nostalgia. She had accomplished so much in the past few years, but she knew her father would have been even more excited about what was to come. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Sophie, with an expression of barely contained excitement on her face. "Emily, you have to see this," she said, placing a plate in front of her. Emily looked at the plate, intrigued. It was a modern reinterpretation of a classic American dish, but with a surprising twist. The aromas emanating from it were both familiar and completely new. "It's incredible, Sophie," Emily said after tasting a bite. "What will you call it?" Sophie smiled. "I was thinking Memories of Chef Thomas. It's a tribute to your father and everything you've accomplished since you took over." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "It's perfect," she managed to say. That night, as Emily tucked Michael into bed, the boy asked her to tell him a story. "How about I tell you the story of how your grandfather founded a very special restaurant?" Emily suggested. Michael's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." As Emily began to narrate the story, she realized she was telling much more than the story of a restaurant. She was telling a story of family, passion, overcoming challenges, and love. A story that had begun with her father, but was now hers to continue and pass on. "Once upon a time," Emily began, "there was a man named Thomas who loved cooking more than anything in the world." As the words flowed, Emily felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The path she had traveled hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every unexpected turn, had led her to this moment. And as she looked to the future, she knew there were still many exciting chapters to be written in the story of angelic flavors and in her own life. With Michael asleep in her arms and the aromas of the kitchen still lingering in her memory, Emily allowed herself to dream of the possibilities that tomorrow would bring. Her father's legacy was secure, but her own was just beginning to take shape. And with each new day, each new dish, each new smile on the face of someone tasting their food, Emily knew she was writing her own chapter in the great story of love, family, and the food that connects us all.